Hey guys, we've reached the end of the book. Can you believe it? I can't. But to celebrate, celebrate my madness. I'm wearing the same sweater that I wore in the very first episode back, oh my gosh, like a year and some months, I don't know, 18, 19 months ago. So long ago, so long ago. I got this sweater, in Waterford, Ireland, where I bought it for like €1. And that just shows you the journey, the odyssey this sweater has taken. This series began as something that I hoped to finish in like a couple months at most, maybe a couple weeks even, but it somehow ballooned into something much larger. I'm glad I did it. I am so glad though it is done, because I just do not want to do a large project like this anytime soon. But it was a wonderful experience, and it has forced me to learn so much more about Ulysses, so I am grateful that I did it. And I began this series, I think, in France. That's where I was recording when I began. And now I'm somewhere in the Americas, floating around. Who knows where I'll be in the future? Greenland probably, but let's look at this mystery that I've mumbled about throughout the book. The mystery man in the Macintosh. Who is this man? I'd like to know. We've talked about some of these mysteries, and the idea, though, of, as Joyce puts it, Sherlock Holmesing their solutions, I don't think that a lot of them, I don't think there's enough information to find that solution. I could be wrong. Maybe outside of the book, in some historical reference, there is information and ideas. But some of the mysteries, such as what happens with Bloom and Molly after the book, that's something I don't think you're going to find in the book, except just your ideas. So what I think Joyce is trying to do with this book is create this field of ideas that you generate. It's kind of like a Rorschach blot for you. What do you think about these mysteries? How does your mind approach them? And each time you read the book, it's going to be a little different. But maintain a spectrum of possibilities. So, for example, if we take one of the mysteries like Macintosh, and I'll talk in a minute about an idea, it's good to have other ideas too, and realize that each idea that you have is going to be somewhere on this spectrum. Some ideas seem pretty good. Other ideas may be totally out of left field, but you're never going to have the full information. And I think that is like with life. Joyce wants you to maintain this kind of agnostic, I've used that word so much, ambiguity. Be comfortable with that ambiguity, and that feeling, if we'd solved these puzzles definitively, then that feeling would be taken away, and that's not the joy of having these puzzles as maintaining the sense of wonder. We've mentioned some of these mysteries like Macintosh, whether Martha Clifford is actually Martha Clifford or it's another character. UP Up, for example, that guy with the really long name, what's his deal? So many mysteries that we could go on about. But, the guy in the cabman shelter, is that the same sailor as the one-legged sailor? Things like that. But I think the Macintosh mystery is certainly one of the most puzzling and in-your-face mysteries. And however confident we become about our ideas about what something means, we need to always hold that idea that it could be undercut at any moment, and that we can be willing to admit that we're totally wrong. I would love to reread Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell's book From Hell, because there's a wonderful part about how much we can know about the past. He's using it in reference to the Jack the Ripper murders, but it can apply to pretty much everything we know about the past. But if you have any wild crackpot theories about any part of the book, I encourage you to throw your ideas into the comments, respond to other commenters in the comment sections. And even if it's like really off the wall, like that, Buck Mulligan is the Martha Clifford writer, or that Gertie McDowell is a robot from the future, it doesn't matter. If you have some kind of idea, just throw it out there. I'd love to hear it. It can be nonsensical, preferably have some kind of evidence in the book or in history or something to back it up. But even if it's just a neat idea, just toss it out there. I'd love to hear it. Marshall McLuhan, a huge Joyce fan, talked a lot about this traditional idea in literary criticism is to present a thesis, which is sort of an argument. But rather than that, McLuhan talks about probes, which are just ideas that he kind of shoots out there that he doesn't seem to always believe them, and he doesn't even try to be consistent. And I think he gets that from Joyce, because probes are things that are designed to make the recipient of the art, to make them think and come up with their own ideas and blossom out into new territory. That's what Joyce was doing. That's what McLuhan was doing. And that's what I hope my series has done, because this is not meant to provide answers. It's meant to provide questions and to get you, I've given you some resources. Like, I'll link to some websites in the very first episode and the information and throughout the course. But really, I want you to think for yourself. Things like the annotations are helpful, but you don't have to agree with all the conclusions. But just have fun with the book. If all of Joyce's books are autobiographical, which in some sense I think they are, but he's a person who spent a lot of his life in the literature of other authors, and he incorporates that into his own memoirs, if you want to call Dubliners and Portrait of the Artist, Stephen Hero, Exiles, and so on, and of course Ulysses, if you want to call them memoirs or autobiographical reminiscences. Perhaps they are, perhaps they're not, but I think then maybe we have to include Finnegan's Wake, and maybe we'll find some more answers when we look at that. I've often wondered if Joyce was familiar with the Zen koan, which is these stories in Zen Buddhism, the tradition of not meant to, they're not riddles and they're not puzzles, but they're meant to, one of the most famous is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? That was Bart Simpson's answer, but it's really like, what's the sound of a clap without the reciprocal hand? And I think that's kind of, if you look at Zen koans, they're meant to be like Ulysses. I think you're meant to enjoy that ambiguity and be comfortable with it. Maybe conspiracy theories, which I've mentioned before, are our modern equivalent of Zen koans, because once we have, like for example, the JFK assassination, if we had definitive proof of who the murderer was, it seems Lee Harvey Oswald is the source that we say, but we have all these other theories about other gunmen and so on. If we somehow could know, I think there was this Arthur C. Clarke book that I read once, Childhood's End, in which they could somehow look back into history and find the answers to everything. If we could somehow do that, it would remove the sense of wonder that we have with these things. But we're kind of entering this moment in history where, because nobody trusts any other source that doesn't agree with their theories, we have this, we're entering this hallucinosphere of ideas in which nothing can be trusted, so that everything is suspect. Is that a good or bad thing? Who can say? When even the people closest to us are living in incredibly different worlds, it's quite remarkable. But that other author I mentioned before, Robert Anton Wilson, he talks a lot about holding different, I think in Prometheus Rising, he talks about this quite a bit. He has experiments in which you actually try to have different beliefs, but then letting it go so that you're not really attached to any one, and you realize that they're all kind of, they all have their blind spots and they're all elusive in some ways. But anyways, back to Macintosh. I'm going to give you a possible solution. I think it's the best solution that I can come up with at this point in my life. But do I believe it? I don't know. I like it in some ways, but I'm willing to discard it at any moment. But it's based on my life, my experiences, my readings, and even this whole course is based on my life, my my readings, my experiences. And another person doing a Ulysses course might have totally different angles, and that's great. So Nabokov, in his book on literature, does discuss the Macintosh mystery. He devotes a few pages to it, listing the occurrences of Macintosh in the text. I'm not going to do that with all of them. Just remember, though, the first time we see him is in Hades, and Bloom's like, who's that man in the Macintosh? I'd like to know. And then we see him several other times throughout the book. But Nabokov's solution is that Macintosh, the man in the Macintosh, is James Joyce, the author. And his basis for that is this quote in Scylla and Charybdis when they're talking about Shakespeare, and they say this. Stephen says, stringendo, he has hidden his own name, a fair name, William, in the plays, a super here, a clown there, as a painter of old Italy, set his face in a dark corner of the campus. And that's pretty much all Nabokov says. He doesn't really explain why, though. He just goes along with Joyce saying that. So if that is the case, and Macintosh is Joyce, you may be wondering, though, wait a minute, isn't Joyce Stephen Dedalus? So what's the point of having this other character and not even naming him by name? Not named. Because, and this is my argument, Stephen Dedalus is not James Joyce. He is a reconstruction, a fictionalized, palatable, more as a literary character reconstruction of James Joyce turned into this Stephen Dedalus. After all, where was James Joyce on Bloomsday? Well, the reason it's significant is because it's the date of his first date with Nora Barnacle. So he knows where he was on Bloomsday, what he was doing. And there is this gap in Stephen's day between, I think in Wandering Rocks is the last time we see him, until Oxen of the Sun, several hours later. There is that gap of time in which he could have theoretically had that date with Nora Barnacle, perhaps. But does it jive with the rest of his day, in which he doesn't seem excited about a date coming up? He seems, remember that part in the library when he's talking about finding love, he says, and my turn? When? There still seems to be this great hole in his life, and if he had, as James Joyce apparently did, got a hand job from Nora Barnacle on Bloomsday, would he feel the need to go to Nighttown afterward? I don't think so. But for the purpose of Ulysses, it makes more sense to have Stephen Dedalus be this distraught character who is struggling and searching for love or some kind of companionship still. It just makes it more in need of saving from, or at least help from Bloom. So I think to say that Stephen Dedalus had a date with Nora Barnacle and it's just not mentioned at all is a bit reaching. But Joyce knows where he was that day. Perhaps he remembers what he was wearing, a brown Macintosh. That would be certainly significant if it was a key day in your life to know what you were wearing. Certainly something like as prominent as a brown Macintosh. So perhaps he knows also where he was that day. Maybe he went to Glasnevin Cemetery to see his mother's grave. And maybe he was in these other spots that he shows up throughout the book. Perhaps. In creating, though, two characters, Joyce as Brown Macintosh Man and Stephen Dedalus, he kind of has to choose which is he going to be moving forward into the future. And I think by writing Ulysses, we have the answer. And sorry, Stephen Dedalus, this is going to be, in some ways, you are going to be crucified for your art. You're going to be knocked off the page. But here's the good news. And this is very Christ-like, isn't it? He's going to be resurrected as James Joyce, someone who can fulfill this promise and can make this great book, even though it requires looking back on the self that he once was and who is dead now. In the fractured multiverse that he has created, he allows the man in the Macintosh to live, to meet Nora Barnacle, to leave Ireland and to write Ulysses. That's my theory anyways. Or maybe that's not what Joyce had in mind at all. Maybe, for all we know, the narrator of Cyclops is the man in the Macintosh. That's a possibility I thought of, because we're not in Bloom's head at that point, so maybe he's thinking to himself, oh my gosh, it's the man in the Macintosh again, but because the narrator is the Macintosh. I don't believe that idea at all. I think that's kind of a bad idea, but it's one of those, I think that's what we do with Ulysses. We come up with these notions and we try them on. We try, see if there's evidence, we play with them, we converse with others about them and see how they fit. And some do and some don't. And our ideas will change every time we read Ulysses, and that's great. Also, I certainly don't want to offend anyone with my 9/11 conspiracy theory that I threw into the Nausicaa videos. I included it to show how ridiculous some ideas can be. If you hold a reality tunnel really strongly, you'll start to see things that certainly don't make sense. There's a series of science fiction books called the Cornelius Quartet by Michael Moorcock, that about this character who moves between universes like a multiverse, and in some universes he's like a rock star, in other words he's a scientist, in other ones he's like a priest, and these identities, the phrase I think in Ulysses is he's all in all, and that's, for me, that's what I get from Stephen and Bloom. They're the same person. Molly, they're all the same person. We all contain these possibilities. Congratulations if this is your first time completing Ulysses. I hope you do go back and check it out some more, because the first time you're really just setting up this scaffolding, and every time you read it you'll make new connections, new understandings. You're like filling out all that it contains, and your memories of it will be stronger so that you'll start to understand different points and how they correspond. Remember when I said to read the book slowly? Well, I'm glad you finally made it to the end, but like Mina Purfoy's struggle, it took probably more than 3 days, but I hope it was worth it, and I hope you'll go back and read it again. One thing I love about Ulysses, as it looks back on stories like the Odyssey and the Bible, in which people seem really simple. You know, the people that were telling these stories, for the most part, they were very simple people. They were, living out in the desert or somewhere, and their role in life was pretty well established. If they were young, their job was to survive, to get older. If they were middle-aged, their job was to get married, have a farm or something, and have children. And then, take care of the old people, take care of the young people. And the idea, though, that there would be progress, that things could be taken from your mind and thrown into the world and change the order of things, that was the way that progress moved. It was so slow that didn't seem quite like as a relevant issue for the most part. But nowadays we live in a much different world where we can see all the difference in all of history that has happened, and the change in our lifetimes that is continuing to happen is incredible. I've tried to make this course unique and about magic about as much as anything, and how we're all on an odyssey, our journey into identity and finally our return away from that identity. So I hope that you are an artist in some capacity. I think we all are, and I hope that you have changed as you've experienced this book. I applaud you for trying to understand Ulysses, and don't be worried. Don't be worried if you don't understand it all by any means, because every time you go back, you're going to be adding to your understanding, and it is a real universe, and there's so much that Joyce packs in this book, so that every time you're going to be adding something to it in your understanding, and you're going to be growing and changing. And as you do that, as it solidifies, you'll bring more of that perspective and that awareness back to your life. We live in an age where we want everything to be understood immediately, quickly, fastly. But Joyce bypasses that. He says, no, understand slowly and take your time, because the understandings that you bring to Ulysses, there are thousands of skill sets. It's not just one simple thing. And trying to understand it quickly, you're going to miss all of it. So take your time with it. Spend years, decades with it if you can. And I think that will slowly it will start to infiltrate your life. Carl Jung wrote, "What is so staggering about Ulysses is the fact that behind 1,000 veils nothing lies hidden, that it turns neither toward the mind nor toward the world, but, as cold as the moon looking on from cosmic space, allows the drama of growth, being, and decay to pursue its course." If I were doing this course again, I would make changes, sure, but I did this to learn as much as to teach, so it doesn't matter if I've made mistakes or if you disagree with me. That's part of what I enjoy about it. I'd love to hear from you. What are your favorite episodes? Who are your favorite characters? When I began this series, I said that I might be writing a book about Ulysses. I've decided, I think, that I prefer to just leave it as videos because a lot of it is very visual, and this course has allowed me to show things on the maps, images, and so on that would be a lot of hassle with a book that I just don't even want to mess with, and I'm okay with that. If I do pursue a Finnegan's Wake course, I may do a book on that first before I do a course. And I would like to do a course on that, but give me some time, like at least years. If you're asking me before 2025, I think you're wasting your breath. I have no intention of doing any long series until at least then. I'm just enjoying the freedom of being outside of a series. And yeah, I would like to do one on Finnegan's Wake, though. I just am not prepared at this point in my reading to handle it. It's something that if I began it now, I would just not. It would take at least years to get to that point. So I think I'd rather just wait until I feel more competent. For any future readings of Ulysses that I do, or any additional information, there are plenty of other books about Ulysses that I want to read. For example, Stanislaus Joyce wrote a few books that I have not read, things like that, and there's plenty of other material that if I read and I find some interesting comments, maybe I'll tag on some other videos. But for the most part, by and large, this is the end of the main body of the course. Huge thanks to my Patreon patrons. If you would like to help me continue making videos, you too can join along. Go ahead and do it. I will certainly continue to talk about literature, even though I'm not going to be doing a series anytime soon. So keep an eye out for that. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe and do the bell thing for notifications or something. One other thing that I've really gotten from reading Ulysses again is the idea about an artist and their role in the world. What is an artist? And for me, pretty much anything that allows you to put your spirit into is something that can be an art. It could be writing, it can be visual arts, it can be music, it can be computer programming, cooking, you name it. Pretty much anything that allows customizability and allows you to, Bloom was an artist in that he had a voice that he had to bring into the world. So I hope that you, as an artist, are bringing your spirit into things and not leaving them just as, this really mechanical process. Put yourself into the world. I think an artist's role is to bring beauty into the world, and that doesn't necessarily mean to make obviously beautiful things. Joyce shows some very ugly things, and I was thinking about this sculpture by Rodin. I think it's called I forget the name, but it's this old woman, and you look at this and you'd be like, why is he sculpting this image? Why doesn't he do young, beautiful women? But I think if you look at this woman, you can see, they talk about this in Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, but you can see into her identity as a human being and that there's beauty underneath all that. Stephen could not allow his voice to be stifled by very mechanical journalism. Bloom cannot let his voice be stifled. So I ask you, as I conclude this series, what is your art and how will you bring your voice into the world? I've been listening to this biography of Beethoven, and there was a time in his life when he was tempted to commit suicide. He just had so many problems. His growing hearing issues and his struggle and so many different problems, but he refused to. He knew that he still had things to create, still had things that he wanted to show the world. So I ask you, as I conclude the series, what about you?